Hello friends, in this video I will share with you some special tips on how you should go about answering an interview question around failure. Now these questions are pretty standard. Can you tell me about a time when you encountered a failure? Can you tell me about a time when you failed? Can you tell me about a time when you encountered a failure and what did you learn? And so on and so forth. Now before moving into the tips, let me first address why the interviewer is asking you this particular question. The interviewer wants to judge your maturity, your resilience, your temperament, your openness to receiving feedback, and openness to learning from the failure. All of this is almost impossible to gauge from your resume, your cover letter, or even from the interview if this question is not prompted. So without prompting this question, it is very hard to judge from the interview as to how you gauge on all these measures. Now, does it mean that you share your biggest failure in life here in the interview? Or you just simply say that you've never failed? The answer is no to both. We are humans and humans are prone to error and failure. So there is always some sort of failure that we've encountered in life. It's just that you need to pick the right example, massage it in the right way so you can give a perfect answer to this particular question. This is what I will do in this video, that is help you pick the right example and help you massage it with the tips that I will share in this video so you can ace this particular question. Now, one special call out before we move forward. I have two actions for you. In case you find any value from this video, please press the like button as this keeps me motivated and helps me know what kind of content you like. Secondly, press the subscribe button so you get notified as soon as I post new content. On this channel, I post videos twice a week on career and financial success for early and mid-career professionals. Now let's keep rolling with the video. Now number one is focus more on learning than on the failure. That is, what did you learn from the failure and how did you turn that insight into a productive approach? Now note, the failures that you call out in the interview should be about realizing, preparing, or appreciating. Like you were not able to realize a particular assumption, you were not appreciative of a particular task, or you were not prepared. As against about doing, harming, or ruining, because this kind of sounds evil and has some malice to it. So don't talk about that, rather talk about something which is related to you didn't realize the assumption was X versus Y, you were not prepared, or you were not appreciative of some particular situation or individual or their task. Now, in case you have to figure out which example to pick from your life, think of an example where you had a realization, then a revelation, a course correction, and improvement. So you realized there was something wrong, and then it was revealed to you what was wrong, and then you did a course correction, and because of that course correction, you were able to improve things eventually. So use all these four factors and bake them into a story in one flow from A to Z. That is, you start with realization that there is an error or there was an issue. Then you have a revelation that why was there an issue. Then you course correct, and eventually you go into an improvement plan. So make sure whatever story you give, whatever example you pick from your life, you give it in this flow. So very general example here could be that a few years ago you were working on project A, and then you had a realization that the project is not going in the right direction, and hence you thought this would be a good opportunity to course correct. And after that course correction, you started working on project B, and because of project B, you were able to deliver better and greater results. So notice here that how failure is followed by eventual fix. So while you were working on project A, but then you course corrected and got into something which was even better and bigger, which was product B, and hence the results ended up being even better than what the initial expectation was. It's just that you had to course correct, you had to change the direction, you had to fix a few things in the middle, and that is all because of the realization that you had, and you course corrected, and eventually you ended up having better results. So this kind of shows your success, your mastery on managing a failure, turning it into a bigger success. So think of an example where you can convert or you can talk about changing the course in a way that you end up delivering bigger and better success. And hence it is important that you just don't get stuck to the failure and its impact. Rather, you quickly move into course correction and talk about the eventual success. Finally, remember the difference between learning, realization, and course correction and improvement. So it's not like failure happened and you just move into the improvement part. There has to be a learning part in the middle, because this is what the interviewer is looking for. That whenever a failure happens, do you learn from it? Because otherwise this failure is all wasted if you learn nothing. So you have to talk about failure, the learning, and then the eventual improvement. Number 2 tip is choose an example where there was a miscalculation versus a mistake. Mistake is simply an oversight, while miscalculation is right and was accurate at the time you were making it. It's just that when it went into action, it didn't prove right because there were certain assumptions that you made use of which were not the best assumptions, and you only realized when the strategy or the action was put to use. So this could be something that you planned but didn't go as per the plan. You made a strategy which was ineffective. You had a target which was not delivered. All of this could be a miss because of miscalculation on an assumption. Now, this could be as simple as you making an assumption for market growth on a particular business unit. Based on that assumption, you allocate budget to that particular business unit. Now, when the year starts and when the things starts to play out, the market growth ends up being far lower than what you had assumed. Basis that, the revenue growth is far lower than what was projected. And hence now you are stranded with higher budget that was allocated to that business unit. So what did you do? You went around prioritizing what are the most important buckets where you need to spend and what are the least important buckets. And so you can optimize the funding from those buckets because now the revenue is far lower and you need to protect the P&L. And in order for you to protect the P&L, you need to optimize the budget. So now this example is pure miscalculation. It's not like you made a mistake. It was that you assumed something based on what was true at the time you were assuming it. It's just that the assumptions changed because there was some different activity, some influence, external influence in the market which was out of your control. However, you were able to course correct. And the learning from this is that you should always have certain amount of reserve held up with you so that if something changes in your assumption, you can always make use of those reserves in order for you to safeguard the profit and loss statement. Or otherwise, you should always have a plan B ready. So if something changes, you can always course correct and move to plan B in order to protect the P&L. So net, this is how you talk about a miscalculation as against talking about a mistake or an error that you did. Number 3 is don't draw a lot of attention to the word failure. Just say it once at best and then move into telling what you learned and then how did you improve on it. Just don't dwell much on the fact that you made an error with an assumption. Rather, just talk about how you assumed something, it happened, and then what happened and how did you went about course correcting, and because of that course correction, what was the ultimate result. Because if you allocate too much time on talking about the failure, then there will be more spotlight on the failure and you will have less time or less spotlight for what you learned and what did you improve. And as I said initially, the objective here is to explain the interviewer your learning and how you course correct as against what the failure was. Now, number 4 tip is whenever possible, talk more about we than I. This has 2 benefits. One, it kind of dilutes the impact you had in the failure itself because there was a team involved. Yes, you had an input, you had a suggestion, it was your assumption, you designed the assumption, but there were other team members who also agreed to the assumption. So it wasn't only you making an assumption on the market growth, but everyone else was aligned because they thought this was the best assumption at that particular point in time. Second benefit is that it also plays as a team effort. So you kind of show yourself as a team player as against being an individual who is more individualistic. As I've said many times in other videos as well, that I as an interviewer would always want to hire someone who is a good team player versus someone who's intelligent and less of a team player, because I want someone who I can work with, who I enjoy working with, who is compatible with my team, and hence I would hire them because they would just fit in with the team, gel in and add value, as against being an individualistic player even if they are the smartest or the most intelligent person on the face of the earth. So bring in this element and you will also show that you are also a team player and work in a team environment and see yourself and project yourself as a teammate or a team worker. Now, next one is pick an example which has low consequences as against high consequences. So the idea here, as I previously said, is not to pick your biggest failure in life, rather the failure which you can use here as an answer and help explain that you failed, you learned, and you improved. So pick something which was of low consequence because you don't want to really shock the interviewer that you made an error of, let's say, $1 million, and because of your error or because of your miscalculation, the company lost $1 million. Now, even if this was a miscalculation, but losing $1 million is huge. So the interviewer might think that while it was a miscalculation, the individual learned from the miscalculation and also course corrected, but it costed the company $1 million. So such an expensive learning Maybe this guy is into doing learning or learning things in a very expensive way. I don't want to hire such an expensive guy. So make sure that the consequence of the learning was a few $1,000s of miss or error or wastage here and there, and the learning far superseded the cost of the learning or the cost of the failure. That is because of that learning, you were able to save the company far more dollars than were incurred or expensed or lost because of that failure. So make sure the consequences are low, the benefits are high. Now, next tip is to keep your story and example around failure as concise, short as possible. Although I usually advise that whenever it is your best example, you should spend the most amount of time on that example, because this is your best example, your top achievement, and you should spend as much time as possibly available talking about that example. Probably around 5 to 6 minutes on your best example. However, given it's a failure example, this is not your best example, you're not very much proud of it, although there was a learning, hence keep it as short as possible. You had a failure, you had a realization, you learned something, and you course corrected, and just jump out of it as soon as possible versus dwelling too much into it, because the more you dwell, the more questions will arise in the mind of interviewer, and he or she may start probing. And that is where you may end up in a wrong direction, because you want to get them out of the failure as soon as possible, move into course correction and improvement, and just get out of that example as soon as possible. The more you're stuck there, the more difficult it will become for you to really ace and impress in that answer. Now, next tip is don't defend the failure. There are certain individuals who would go about giving an example and then defending it, rationalizing it, or minimizing it. Don't do all of that, because make sure the example to begin with is not a high consequence example, and hence if it's not a high consequence example, it's a low consequence example. You don't really need to rationalize it or minimize it. It is already a good example. Now your objective is pick the learning, course correct, improve, and move out of the example. Now, some examples of defending could be, it didn't set us back that much, but people just overreacted. Or another example I have here is, I was right all along, they just didn't see it. Or my mistake was actually beneficial in the long run because of XYZ. So this is kind of defending the failure itself. Don't do that. So this all sounds like you're defending the situation. Rather, you need to just quickly talk about the situation and then move into the learning part. And then course correction and improvement. This is where your focus should be, and then you move out of the example altogether. Now, next tip is to see if you can pick an example where you were able to salvage part of the project. While part of the project faced or encountered the failure, the other part of the project was a huge success, and hence in totality, the project was a success. This could be an example, let's say, of a product launch where you had two different marketing campaigns, and one of it just went well because you had the right assumptions, and the other one just flunked because there were bad assumptions. Net, in totality, you were able to achieve your targets because the one that really worked did wonders and went beyond your assumptions or expectations, while the one that didn't work didn't do as well as what you expected. However, in totality, you were able to achieve your objective because they both worked together. One failed, one did well. However, you still had learnings from the one that failed, and you applied it in future projects. So both of them can be a success together. Now, this way, it didn't cost anything to the company because the company was still able to deliver their overall big objective, while it still helped you learn something on the way and you used it as a failure example. Now, the last tip is around some of the words or adjectives that you should be using as you are flowing through your example. So let me call out some of the words that I have written in front of me. So when you're speaking about the learning part of the example, maybe talk about I learned, I gleaned, I gained an insight, I realized, I understood. When you're speaking about overcoming a challenge, use words like I overcame, I improved, I elevated, I corrected. And when you talk about reimagining a challenge, you talk about recalibrating and adjusted and so on and so forth. Hopefully this video was helpful for you to be now able to ace the answer to the question, that is, what is your failure? Now, before we part ways, there is another video which I've made on one of the most difficult questions in an interview, which is around conflict management. So for that, check out this video where I explain in detail how you should go about answering this question. Other than that, check out another video on one of the most underprepared question and answers in an interview, which is tell me about yourself. Here's the link to that video. Check that out as well. Thank you.